we go. Here we go. Is it working? Is it working? I think it's working. It's telling me I'm waiting, apparently. Let's click on this again. There we go. See? See? Now we're there. My phone did not update. I'm like, wait, are we there? Is this how this works? Well, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with the floating head known as Captain Marrow.
Boy.
Well, want to do something a little bit different tonight with how many books have you got now? 3?
At the moment, 3. Yes.
Well, there you go. With you having 3 books out, you got a couple other projects I want to talk about. Figured,
And
you know
2
what?
other books in the works.
Well, there you go.
I'm a busy man.
Figure, hey, let's do a live. So oh yeah, his camera doesn't work. That's why we got I'm not used to the mirror. Well, I'm still doing it the wrong direction. This way. There we go.
Yeah, I'm just a photo today, unfortunately. Webcam issues.
So this pretends a podcast. I mean, you could just walk away from your phone or computer, whatever, cook some late night dinner. I mean, whatever you kids do, have at it.
Cook some hardtack.
Frogman actually. Oh, hang on 1 second. 1 second.
You got some hardtack?
You were asking about Frogman? Frogman made this for me. Look at this thing. It's nice. So well made. All right. Well, let's start. Introduce yourself.
All right. In that case, my name is Captain Marrow. Technically, real name Adam Marrow, but pirate name Captain Marrow. I do a lot of educational stuff underneath this moniker. So, currently, I have published 2 books that are, available for purchase at the moment. That is Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasures of the Southeast Coast, and also Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasures of the Northeast Coast. It's follow-up. But also, as of recent, I've recently finished Arabian Gold, Charleston's Red Sea Pirates of 1692, being the true tale of Captain George Rayner and the crew of the Bachelor's Delight. This is a departure from my previous 2 books, which are meant to be part of an ongoing series. Specifically about, as the title might suggest, Charleston Pirates during 1692. Currently, I do have more titles for that series in the works, but it was a pressing matter to go ahead and finally get Arabian Gold out. I have a lot of events coming up locally this year throughout South Carolina, so I really needed my Charleston book to get finished before I continue on with Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasures of Atlantic Canada and beyond.
I know I've got a few new Canadian friends and fans, so
cool.
Definitely trying to get them to keep their eyes open for that one.
Yeah, it won't be too long. It's very close to being done.
So let's get this out of the way.
Yep.
For those unfamiliar with the history, why did you pick such a long title?
So basically, one of the things I learned early on, or at least was recommended to me early on throughout publishing pirate history books, is whenever you go in and you try to, write your own book, publish your own book, just working on stuff in general, you're supposed to play to the audience. And different genres have different built-in expectations, not only with cover design, but also with title. And notoriously, history books have long titles. They typically have a primary title, followed by a secondary title. And if you want to go really deep into the specific topic of the book, sometimes they have a tertiary title. That is what I've done. So by default, this book is Arabian Gold. If you want to get a little bit more in depth, it's Arabian Gold, Charleston's Red Sea Pirates of 1692. And if you want to go really in depth and type out the whole damn thing, Arabian Gold, Charleston's Red Sea Pirates of 1692, being the true tale of Captain George Rayner and the crew of the Bachelor's Delight. You'll find titles like this all throughout history. This is not uncommon.
So, like, for those of you who don't know, when a lot of us say the general history of pirates, That is not the whole title.
That is not the full title. That is the shorthand version.
So how long did it take you to do the research on this?
So, regarding the topic of this, I started looking into George Rayner as a pirate, technically all the way back in 2018, which is around the same time that I started writing Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasure to the Southeast Coast, which originally was meant to just be a book on Charleston pirates, then South Carolina pirates, then Carolina pirates, then the Southeast pirates, because it kept not being thick enough. But basically, I started looking into George Rayner around that time period because there is local folklore here in the area regarding him. Um, just a brief little TLDR. He shows up in 1692. He and his men arrive from the Red Sea, whole bunch of treasure, and that spawned forth a bunch of buried treasure myths. So I started looking into him around that point in time. And honestly, the reason why I would say that I decided to go ahead and do this book is largely for the same reasons that I decided to do Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasures, the series. It's because there was so many little tidbits of information spread all out throughout so many different places that for my own sanity, I wanted it all compiled in one location. And just like with the topic of folklore, that didn't exist. So it started off as a personal project. I just wanted to compile the George Rayner stuff into one, short TLDR document for myself to keep all the facts straight. Because George Rayner and his crew from the Red Sea Men, his crew of the Red Sea Men, it is spread out all throughout tons of different books and primary sources, and often he and his men appear in the history as footnotes of Thomas Tew and Henry Every. Never before has there been a book entirely devoted to George Rayner and his story. So throughout the course of me presenting on him and mentioning him before, including him in my prior books, I wished a book like this existed, but it didn't. So from my understanding, that's one of the main reasons why you would want to write a book.
Yep.
If it doesn't exist, it's like that's a void that should be filled. And a long held thought between myself and at least a few fellow researchers, I believe yourself included, we need more books that have to do with microhistory. We need more books that are specifically targeted on a specific pirate, especially lesser known pirates. Like, for example, I love some of the Blackbeard books that I have, but my God, there's a lot of Blackbeard books out there. There's a number of Stede Bonnet books even.
What cracks me up is with Henry Every, which I have to write a book on him eventually. It needs to be done. There's so much room with the lack of good books. There's so much room for I'm going to write about Henry Avery's buried treasure that doesn't actually exist and pass it off as history because there's nothing to really go against.
Right. We all know how much you dislike the name Avery.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's wrong.
That's something that always annoys me is it's so easy to tell people that did not actually look at the first person sources.
Right.
They didn't look at any of the historical documents. It's that spelling. Now, like some of them, like Anne Bonny with that little extra E, I can understand it because of it's just the natural way to spell it nowadays.
Right. And I will admit that even regarding the title of my book, from what I can tell, realistically, or I guess, appropriately, it honestly should be spelled Rayner, Rayner. But NOR is the, it is the agreed upon spelling of our modern time.
You realize with your name, you're going to end up doing that to like later historians, right?
Probably.
Was it with an O or was it with an A?
Well, I address it in the book specifically.
I'm saying with your name.
Oh yeah, Marrow and Marrow.
and then they'll find my videos, and because of my Appalachian, I can like put the two together, and it's now I can't even say it right now. Now I had it. Now I can't even.
Have I ever even mentioned the reason why I use this name? to you?
No, I don't think you have. I don't think you did on the last one either. So
Okay. So basically, my last name is Morrow. My name is Adam Morrow. Morrow, as in the word tomorrow. However, so my father's last name is also Morrow, as is my grandfather. My great grandfather, his last name was Marrow, Merrow. And so were a few of the generations beforehand. My last name should be pronounced Marrow, Merrow. But going along with, spelling not being standardized back during the 18th century, people writing down names as how they would have been heard, it is absolutely the case that people probably at some point in time would have written down the last name Marrow spelled like bone marrow because of how it's, popularized as bone marrow. So it's a fun tie-in with the word bone marrow, considering the fact that I do pirate stuff, skull and bones, blah blah blah. But it's an actual part of my actual family history. My last name should be Marrow. It should be pronounced Marrow.
and speaking of spelling, so there were two Bachelor's Delights.
Indeed. Well, as far as I can tell, there are two separate Bachelor's Delights. There is a very corner case scenario where these two separate Bachelor's Delights might have been the same one, but God, is it a stretch? Like, there are so many things that have to work out perfectly for that to be the case. So, do you want to say anything about the Bachelor's Delight, the William
No,
Dampier version?
I am letting you go with this one because
All
this
right.
was
All right. In that case, so probably the most famous and popularized Bachelor's Delight is that of the crew of William Dampier, Lionel Wafer, Edward Davis. They did a whole bunch of stuff during the 1680s that took them all throughout the Pacific Ocean. It did take them out to the area of, let's see, Virginia. I'm trying to think of other places it went. Help me out here.
oh well
I know that
they went around they pretty much went everywhere. That's
they did go everywhere. I know that at one point in time that William Dampier did end up over the Indian Ocean and like
Yep.
that area, but I can't recall if that was as a member of the Bachelor's Delight or if that was like later on when he was like with HMS Roebuck.
No, that was Bachelor's Delight, and then he
It was
pretty much
Delight.
went back.
He went back with Roebuck.
Yeah, because that's how he
Okay.
knew a lot of the. If I'm anybody in the comments, if either of us are wrong, but that was
Roast us now.
Because he did a lot of that. He did a lot of his adventures. Like he kept doing adventures. I mean, the crew of the fancy right here.
So yeah, with that original incarnation, there was the Bachelor's Delight, and I will note that a majority of the time, I would say at least 90% of the time, that ship is spelled BATCH, as in a batch of things. Every now and then, people will incorrectly spell it as BACH, as in like the word Bach. So, what ended up happening is the resolution of William Dampier, Lionel Wafer, the rest of them. They eventually part their different ways around the late 1680s or so. Then, all of a sudden, we do have another Bachelor's Delight popping up in the vicinity of Jamaica. Confusingly, it is associated with James Kelly. James Kelly being a member of the original Bachelor's Delight. For a very long time now, a lot of historians have just automatically assumed that the Bachelor's Delight of the 1690s is the same Bachelor's Delight of the 1680s, especially with James Kelly being a tie between the two of them. However, throughout my own research of doing this book, it seems that is not the case, especially because of a number of historical documents that originates from the research of a French historian named Renaud Lepre. Do you know of his name?
It's French. My French years will tell you right now. I'm off with the French ones.
So I was initially led on to the topic of this man, Renaud Lepre. I've actually, unfortunately, never been able to interact with him just yet. However, he is credited in the book because a lot of the foundations that I've worked off of for my book does involve a lot of the stuff that he came across a good half decade ago. So I have a friend that lives nearby me, within an hour drive of me. His name is Matt McLean. I'm not sure if you know that name by chance.
A lot of you watching should know that name.
All right. Well, Matt McLean, he is a pirate historian and also fellow pirate history author. He's published a handful of books so far. He published A Merry Life and a Short One, which was a compilation of books that were about historic pratfalls and things you wouldn't want to do as a pirate. He also published Piracy Papers, which was a collection of primary source documents. And then also, he did the 4-year history of George Roberts, which was kind of a retelling of the original publication, originally, which was attributed to Daniel Defoe, which may or may not have been the case. A lot of things were attributed to him back then. So, in general, I will say Matt McLean is a very knowledgeable person. A lot of the times, whenever I'm stuck on stuff, I need help researching stuff. Admittedly, a lot of the times I reach out to you, but also I reach out to Matt McLean. I can have
Honestly, the easiest way to summon him, hop onto one of the pirate Facebook groups and
yes,
claim something absolutely historically wrong. You'll either get him, you, or me.
so yeah, between you and him, you guys are the two that I can hit up with a phone call real quick and stay on the phone with for 2 hours on a single topic. Like you guys are good conversationalists when it comes to pirate history. So when I was starting to really try to rope together everything regarding George Rayner and the crew of the Bachelor's Delight, naturally I reached out to him to see if he had anything to offer, and he did because I mean he lives here in the same area as me. He's done a number of lectures and stuff here in the South Carolina area talking about George Rayner because he is a very important pirate for our state, and it is just admittedly crazy that like no one knows his name. So I reached out to him. He'd done lectures on it before, and he gave me a collection of documents that he had compiled over the years as well, in addition to my own. And I would say out of everything that he presented me with, both me and him agreed that this researcher from France, Renaud Lepre, had uncovered some of the most important stuff regarding George Rayner. So this wasn't even necessarily something that Renaud Lepre was looking to publish himself. This was something specifically that someone, I don't recall the name off the top of my head, I'm sorry, someone had reached out to him who was specifically trying to put together a historical book regarding the buccaneering age, the latter half of the 17th century, and had reached out to Lepre regarding George Rayner. Unfortunately, that author passed away. He never got a chance to actually put his work out there. I don't know, what he had compiled, and what sits around unreleased. But in the aftermath of it, Renaud Lepre did go ahead and put up all of his findings online, specifically regarding George Rayner. And that was a huge tipping point for me because it no longer meant that George Rayner and his crew were operating off of the supposition that they were an extension of the original Bachelor's Delight. Instead, he starts to talk about the actual ship that they captured and how it had been renamed into Bachelor's Delight. Notedly, not spelled the same way. BACH, not BATCH. I was passing it back to you for a second while I was taking a sip of my drink, but thanks
I'm sorry. I find this very intriguing. I like the thing a lot of people don't realize about the Red Sea pirates. A lot of them were what you'd think of as like a dream team of the buccaneering age, and like the ones we think of just all they did was the Red Sea.
Mhm.
There's so much crossover that people ignore, and it's like, no, like you can't talk about the early golden age of piracy without the buccaneers.
Right. Yeah, and for a long time, both me and you have agreed that we both think that the latter half of the 17th century is arguably more exciting than the earlier
Yes.
portion of the 18th century.
Like I'm gonna say right now, and I know I've said it to you. I don't know if I've really actually said it on the channel. Like I think the difference between like the what we think of as the golden age of piracy with Blackbeard and everything,
Mhm.
and the Red Sea pirates, the difference is almost like you're talking about a bunch of crackheads stealing catalytic converters in the Blackbeard era, and then you've got like the actual mob in the late 17th century.
Right.
Both criminals, but one's kind of a little classier.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the pirates during the 17th century, the latter half of it, like just wildly successful. Everything that they do, very impressive. And
and a,
very much so, more of them get away with what they did.
and a lot of them settled down just like
Yeah.
pretty much your book talks about that.
Yeah, pretty much a lot of the pirates of the 17th century and the Buccaneers, like they go off, they do their stuff, they end up with a massive amount of success, they retire and they live out normal lives, they get away with the stuff that they did. And the early 18th century pirates, they're people like them. I get it. They're the hardcore rebels. They're rebelling against everything
Fishing
going on
boats.
during the time period. But the fact is, they're making ends meet. they're they're doing everything they can to support their rebellious attitude, and usually they end up getting killed or getting hanged. Like that, there was a weirdly clear line right at 1700, almost, it seems, where there's this big change that happens of these two different eras of piracy.
Yep. I mean, one of the guys I talked about in my Red Sea video, they tried
Mhm.
to arrest him, I think, in 1701, but by that point, like he had already been established in his area. He married into a rich family, and there is one of the founding families, I believe, of Maryland, if I remember correctly. And it's like they refused to arrest him because it's like, no, he's a good guy. Yeah, he might have been a
What
pirate at some point, but
was his name? Was his last name Black something?
no.
Blackstone? Okay, because that actually appears in my book. One of the members of the crew of the Bachelor's Delight under George Rayner, uh, after they make it back to Charleston, there's this guy. It's either, I want to say it's Blackthorn, Black Sword. It's something like that. It's a very unique last name that,
Kind
you
of a
know,
pretentious last name. I hate to say it that
yeah,
way.
kind of. Like
It might be.
it
It
sounds
might
like a
be.
piratey last name. But basically, him and like one of his friends who is a member of the crew, they went up to Maryland. They settled down with their like riches from going off to the Red Sea with George Rayner. And at some point in time, like later on, like 4 or 5 years down the line, like once it gets closer to 1700, they summoned the two of them into court, and they're like, "Yeah, we think he might have been a pirate, like within the last decade." But everyone was just so, attached to him. They're like, "He's a good dude. He's a family man. He has a wife. He has kids. He's an upstanding member of society. We can't convict him." Like, that happens. Like, once you get back and you initially get away with it, once you establish yourself into a community, you have people that'll back you. Like, these pirates got away with stuff that way. They got away with it by being charismatic and being wealthy. I guess wealthy and charismatic go hand in hand when you can pay
Yeah,
people off.
yeah. That's something somebody the other day on one of the pirate groups was talking about Henry Avery, and of course it was like, and I
Was it
brought up like he what like there's no way he could have gotten Thomas too and everybody else involved and let him be the leader if he wasn't charismatic. Thomas too had taken on bigger ships than what the Fancy was before, so it wasn't a matter of, oh, you can't fight us. Like they definitely could have,
right?
but there was definitely a lot of respect there. And I,
Yeah,
for some
charisma
reason,
and respect go a long ways.
I feel like actually Frogman right there. For some reason, I prefer the Krakens. And well, that's the thing right there. Like I feel like a lot of times when we talk again about the golden age of piracy, we take the the later Golden Age, their mentality, and apply it to the Red Sea era.
Mm-hmm.
And we're dealing with two entirely different groups of people
Right.
with two entirely different end goals. Like a lot of the folks that a lot of the folks from like the Blackbeard era, I honestly can't picture them settling down.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to imagine. Like, where would they do it, and with what income would they do it with? Like, there's not a good end
Le
goal.
Buzz, he's the only one I can think of right there.
Yeah,
The buzzard. And like he failed at that too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's definitely different motives going on. Like, 17th century was people with grand ideas who got away with shit, and 18th century were pirates that were trying to cling on to like an ideal, and like they were just making ends meet. They were succeeding for as long as they could until their time ran out.
Stealing
And that's
catalytic
what happened
converters.
for pretty much all of them. Um, that being said, one exception is George Lowther,
Yep.
because even here recently, I have an event coming up in Charleston where I have a bunch of authors congregating into one area, and one of them is an author.
That's actually was going to be the next question. So
All right.
we'll segue. Talk to us about this event in Charleston. When is it? What's going on?
All right. In that case, so last year we did an event in downtown Charleston. Specifically, it was a joint production between an area that we have, a building that we have called the Old Exchange Building in Provost Dungeon. It was a building that was built in the latter half of the 18th century. However, it's built directly atop the same exact site where Stede Bonnet and his men were held captive before their execution. And it's also where Richard Worley's men were also held captive before their execution, not too far away. Back during that point in time, it was a wooden building called the Watch House. But nowadays, the Old Exchange Building in Provost Dungeon sits on top of it. So at that site, last year, we did a joint production between the Old Exchange Building and the Powder Magazine, which was built in 1715. We had reenactors set up out in front of the Powder Magazine, and then I was set up inside the Old Exchange Building with copies of my books. And then during the afternoon, around 3 p.m. or so, we did a pirate trial. We did a reenactment essentially for the public who, they paid admission to come into the building. They got a chance to explore the dungeon down below, check all the history of the building, and while they were there, they could come up and see the production. We did a trial of what was last year, 2024. So we did
Yep.
1724 idea of a trial. This would be a little bit late in the golden age of piracy. Some people claim that it starts wrapping up around 1718, 1720. Some people say it extends all the way to 1730. But we were trying to work off the idea of, what if there was a straggler pirate who eventually ends up being caught? And, it went well. We had a really good turnout. We had the news come out. The streets were blocked off because we had so much of a line to get into the building. We had news footage and stuff inside. We had photographers. It was a great turnout. It was a good day for the building for sure, for the Old Exchange. So I wasn't too surprised when this year rolled around and they absolutely wanted us to come back and to repeat for it to not just be a one-time thing. However, and I got put in charge of the event from the perspective of the pirate trial. That being said, the woman who is really in charge of the event, her name is Catherine Pemberson. She ran the Powder Magazine down the street. Unfortunately, the Powder Magazine has closed to the public for now due to budget cuts. All the political stuff that's happening at the moment. So regarding that, she ended up having to back out of the program. As a result, I was put in complete charge of the event for the most part. I still have to run things by the director of the Old Exchange and Provost Dungeon, but he basically gave me free control over it. He said, I trust what you're going to do with it. Do whatever you want. I'm like, neat. So I was like, okay, so the trial is back on for sure. And one of the things I really wanted to do was to put together like rework the transcript for the trial that we did from 1724, dial it back to 1692, and for it to be a trial that might have been specifically regarding George Rayner. So not necessarily just me being on a George Rayner kick as of recent, but as of recent, I've also gone through and have been establishing my own like reenactment educational crew for the crew of the Bachelor's Delight.
Oh, that's the next
Specifically,
question.
specifically to tell the history of George Rayner and the Bachelor's Delight. I actually didn't even start putting the book together until after I had formed this crew. It's just I started to sit down and compare all my notes to make sure that I would be able to accurately present the history of George Rayner and the crew of the Bachelor's Delight to the public. And while
It
I
was
was
actually
comparing all my
funny.
notes, I'm like, I
I
wish this was a book.
I even said to somebody, I was like, yeah, I was talking about one historian friend. He's doing this thing. I wish he'd turn into a book. And then it's like a day later, hey, so I'm gonna do this book, and I'm, oh, okay, but I don't even have to suggest it to you. Okay,
Right.
that this works. Let's go with this. I'm just gonna go with the flow here.
So yeah, in contact with the director of the Provost Dungeon, I was given I was given like direct control over pretty much whatever I wanted to do with this. And last year, I was set up inside all by my lonesome upstairs. There was a lot of traffic that was coming into and out of the building, but like it would have been cool if there was a couple more people set up, upstairs with me before and after the trial event. Because the trial performance, it's about maybe half an hour plus maybe 15 minutes of like Q&A following it. But both before and afterwards, I saw like consistent flow of people that were excited for it and waiting for it to happen. So I have a lot of connections. I have a lot of connections in the pirate history crowd. So this year I've kind of blown it. I don't want to say I've blown it out of proportion, but I would like to blow it more out of proportion for next year, maybe, considering, hoping that this year goes well. But upstairs, I have a number of authors in addition to myself. There's going to be, again, myself, along with the aforementioned Matt McLean.
Oh,
Craig,
right there he is, actually in the comments. He
wonderful.
missed. We were talking about him. He just appears.
He does that. So yeah, we'll have Matt McLean out there again with his books, Merry Life in a Short One, Piracy Papers, 4 Years Voyage of George Roberts, and we'll also have Craig Chapman. Craig Chapman, he's a military historian. He's written books before on the Civil War and also on World War II. But he also started delving into the 18th century. He did a book about ships. What is it? Warren Jenkins' Ear. Warren Jenkins' Ear book. And then coming up here soon, on April 28th, he has a book coming out specifically for George Lowther, which is how we got into this tangent. But then in addition, we also have, see, who else do we have? We potentially have Kevin Duffus coming down from North Carolina, known for his books on Blackbeard and his unique stance on Blackbeard and his own idea of his origins. We also have potentially Benerson Little coming out from Tennessee. Do not take this as like this is definitely going to happen. This is a hopeful thing. He's trying to move a few things around to show up. We also have Jeremy Moss. Jeremy Moss, he is the person who, as far as I'm concerned, has written the definitive book on Stede Bonnet, which was great. Again, we talked about microhistory and pirates that deserved like their own dedicated book. So it's nice for Stede Bonnet to have a book that's not just the footnote of Blackbeard.
Yep.
Then we also have, in addition to him, we have Christopher Bird Downey. He's done a number of Charleston area history books, including his own book on Stede Bonnet and another book, Charleston, the Golden Age of Piracy, a general book that talks about Blackbeard, Stede Bonnet, Richard Worley. I believe Rayner's mentioned in there as well. And then we also, as far as I know, have Virginia Chandler on board. Now, Virginia Chandler, she's a name that you might not recognize.
I actually do, and I'm trying to figure out why.
So she's done a good number of books. Some of them are admittedly fantasy novels, but she's done a collection of history novels as well. So she writes historical fiction. She does have a book called. Let me make sure I get this right. I was not prepared.
For some reason, I think she's one that I've actually people have been suggesting I read because apparently she does good research.
Yes, she does. It is off the top of my head. The book is The Devil's Treasure. It has a subtitle that I cannot recall. You know how they be with subtitles.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, her book I think is unique because it is written as historical fiction, yes, but you actually read through it as if it were a collection of archived journals and notes from a whole bunch of people. I personally think it's cool because when you're reading through the book, it's kind of the same as like doing research on any historical topic. It's like reading found footage. It's like a found footage historical adventure novel. But she's long followed the page and she, takes into account all the history stuff. She's writing around history. She's not rewriting history. She's not presenting a fantasy story in this
I am
case.
I'm gonna say I'm 99% sure that's who people keep recommending because I keep
Nice.
not gonna lie, sometimes history gets a little boring.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm
It can.
sewing and it's like
It can be dry.
and like we've talked, some authors may not be up to the best level. And
But yeah,
I'd rather have something I can just relax and listen to and
right. But yeah, we have some other guests as well. There's a potential chance I might have Eric Lavender on board as well. If you're not familiar with his name, he's the main person who runs the Charleston Pirate Tours downtown.
okay.
He walks around with a blue and gold macaw named Captain Bob, and he's been doing this since the '90s. He's long-standing player in Charleston pirate history. He's been working for the last couple of years on a book specifically on Charles Vane, which he just let me know as of recent that should be done in the next couple of weeks, and that he might have available for the event. So that would be neat.
Ooh, that'd be nice.
I also have the Cape Fear Explorers coming down. They are a maritime archaeology and, in general, on land digging up stuff archaeology group coming down from the Cape Fear area, as the name implies.
I follow their stuff a lot because it's like, ooh, what'd you find now?
They have a pretty big online following. They have like 154,000 followers or something on Facebook.
In fact, it was months ago they asked about something and I think I commented on it actually. It's because it was something I recognized. I'm like, oh, I know what that is.
Yeah, I've been at a few different events with them. I was at the Feast of the Pirates in Wilmington last year alongside them. And then also I'll be seeing them here in the end of the month. There's another event happening up in North Carolina at the end of the month on March 29th called Pirates Parlay. It's like a big indoor event thing that we're doing. They'll be set up there as well. But they'll be set up at the Charleston event, which is titled Charleston Under the Black Flag. And they'll be set up with a variety of nautical artifacts and such. I also have a couple of other leads I'm waiting to hear back on. I'm optimistically hoping for this one guy to show up. He does stuff with like shark teeth and shark fossils and talks about sharks along the Carolina coasts.
What's the date on the event? I'm putting it in the chat.
Okay. It is May 24th from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. And the trial performance specifically takes place at 2 p.m.
Boom. See, I did not know that this chat thing would actually work on StreamYard because I don't normally. So I'm like having fun with.
Sometimes shit just works out. Can I swear?
Yeah, you can swear.
Okay. Oh yeah.
We're past the 30-second mark, but I don't even have to worry about it because I talk about Red Sea pirates. We're not monetized. I'm still mad about that.
So yeah, what was your what was this tangent off of?
Well,
we were off on a tangent where I was saying that more books needed to exist dedicated to particular pirates, and I had mentioned Craig Chapman having a book coming out on George Lowther. And we were talking about 17th century pirates and 18th century pirates, specifically 18th century pirates often not getting a good end to their story. Often they got executed or were killed in battle.
And I
And
refer to them as the crackheads of the
right.
18th century.
And George Lowther is a notable exception to those. He started off as a Royal Navy, or in the Royal Navy, and ends up in the Royal Navy again. And that's the reason behind Craig Chapman's title, The Resurrected Pirate, especially regarding his own history, because he has, long been assumed to have been a pirate who killed himself with a pistol on an island. But there's a lot of records and stuff afterwards that present the story otherwise. So I'm looking forward to his release.
Oh, okay. So we almost got into it on the tangent, but you're starting a new reenacting group. That's not quite a reenacting group.
So what I'm trying to do with this is I'm trying to do a reenactment group that travels around and does a setup that is reminiscent of something that you would see as a museum display. I'm trying to do a reenactment setup that includes a bit more signage, a bit more infographics, that type of stuff to complement the traditional artifacts and replicas, stuff like that. And my primary concern is to present the story of George Rayner and the crew of the Bachelor's Delight, their importance to South Carolina history and Charleston history. Because honestly, operating from home here, me and my girlfriend, we have a rescue family of cats, and it's really hard to find a pet sitter. So a lot of the events that we end up doing are day trips. We do stuff primarily here in the state of South Carolina. Every now and then, I push beyond up to like Wilmington, and sometimes I push beyond down south, down to Savannah. So for the most part, almost all of my events have to do with South Carolina and or in and around Charleston. So I really wanted to focus on what I believe to be the most important pirate for Charleston's history. And yes, a lot of people have heard about Blackbeard. They've heard about him blockading the harbor. That was like a 7 or so day event, maybe 8 or 9. We know about Stede Bonnet. He was pulled here. He had a trial. He got executed. Richard Worley showed up. He got killed in the harbor. His men got captured and then hanged. We had Charles Vane. He showed up for a short period. He plundered some slave ships in the harbor, duked it out with another pirate captain before heading up to Ocracoke. But George Rayner, he shows up in 1692 with a whole entire crew of pirates. They, infiltrate their way into like Charleston society, pay off everyone, and a lot of the names of this crew go on to be some of the biggest historical names that we still speak today in the Low Country here in South Carolina. Like it's a huge deal. Like it is crazy to me that no one knows about this. You can go downtown, you can go to the Powder Magazine, you can go to the Exchange, you can go to the Dungeon, you can go to the White Point Gardens where Stede Bonnet was hanged. You will never find a single plaque that mentions the name George Rayner or any of his men or what happened. Like this was a thing that was very intentionally swept under the rug and for good reason. So as a result, today no one knows about this.
Man, I know nothing about that.
Yep. So like a lot of the wealth that boosted Charleston from being a small, struggling port town into the city it is today, like a lot of these wealthy families, their progenitors, it was pirated wealth. It was Arabian gold brought back from the Red Sea. And like no one talks about it and nobody knows about it. And if you ever do see George Rayner's name mentioned anywhere, again, he's a footnote to Thomas Tew. He's a footnote to books about Henry Every. So I really wanted to push
the good books about Henry Every.
What was that?
The good books about Henry Every.
Yeah. But yeah.
Now, one thing one thing that you mentioned though that you talked about the wanting to not necessarily have like full on historically accurate clothing, which I'm a big fan of,
I know.
but wanting to be a lot more lived in, almost Hollywoodish, but not quite. Black sails, but almost not.
It has been a long-standing opinion of mine that there is a there is a marketing angle to go at things to rope people in with. This is not to say that I have a dislike for historical clothing. I absolutely do not. I love everything that you do. But I do feel like, to somewhat of a degree, it is definitely worth it to look like a pirate to someone so that someone at a passing glance sees you and is like, oh shit, that's a pirate. That is a hook to rope people in. And for me, one of my main concerns have always been, if I can rope people in, I can actually teach them about history. Like, getting their foot in the door in the first place is the hardest step. If you can be aesthetically pleasing, have an aesthetically pleasing setup, then you can tell real history and real events to these people. I don't want to say it's like a Trojan horse of history, but maybe. Like, I don't know. I just always want to, at a glance, look like a pirate to someone out of the corner of their eye without a doubt, and then be like, ooh, is that a pirate? Then when they approach me, I'm like, you want to know about George Rayner and what happened in 1692 and
Hey
how
kids,
he
you all learn about
how he
George Rayner?
persuaded locals and how they're a part of South Carolina history? Like, if I can get their foot in the door, that's my primary concern.
Hey kid, you want to steal a catalytic converter?
But yeah,
I mean, in Pennsylvania, you'd still, if you showed up to a gas station on the way to the event, they'd still be like, "Oh, you're Amish."
interesting. I've taken a
Oh,
I've taken a great number of photos with people in gas stations dressed like this, all throughout
I
Georgia, Florida.
I was it was oh my gosh, which event was it? Oh, Monmouth. We were out in New Jersey.
Mhm,
This big Revolutionary War battlefield. It was the event weekend, like the big event, and I stopped by a Wawa to get
mhm.
gas, and I walked in. My son wanted a snack for the road, and I'm like, "Okay, let's walk in." Are you Christopher Columbus? It's like, bro, we're literally at a Revolutionary War battlefield. I am dressed like it's not even. Are you like it's not? I wasn't wearing anything weird. It was just stereotypical
Right.
Revolutionary War. Napa still got
Christopher
like
Columbus.
what?
That's amazing.
Like the great thing though with doing late 17th century, a lot of the pirates definitely would have looked like pirates. I mean, you got Thomas too walking around New York with the bling.
Yeah, strutting his stuff.
We got a lot more with the Red Sea. You have a lot more of your calicos, your silks, things like that. Like
Right.
it's
Yeah,
a
I
lot
feel
more
like
of what we
the
think
modern
of.
interpretation of, like, what pirates typically look like in people's imagination are definitely more, indicative of the late 17th century than it is Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, Calico Jack, Charles Vane, Rackham, Stede Bonnet, etc. Like, the late 17th century, like, that is the look that people typically have in their mind. Yeah, what was I believe you had mentioned having a question about interesting things that uncovered.
Oh yeah. So while you're doing, sorry, we keep getting on tangents.
We
That's
do.
why I don't even I when I interview you, I never bother writing actual questions. I just write little talking points to talk about because
Mhm.
I know we're just gonna have this
Yeah,
little
we'll
adventure.
naturally get to it. We know how
uh,
conversations work.
so what was the most interesting thing you found while doing your research? If it's something that you care to share.
Yeah, so I have two primary interesting things that I was excited to discover. So, going off of the first one huge deal is the fact that George Rayner and Josiah Rayner are absolutely not the same pirate. So, for people that are familiar with Josiah Rayner, or I guess just George Rayner's history in general, because George Rayner's history in general, for at least since the 1950s, if not earlier, has always been a conglomeration of these two individuals relayed as if they were the same person, and that is totally not the case. So, George Rayner, his short TLDRs, he helps a crew mutiny off the coast of Jamaica, steals after having stolen a French ship as legal privateers with a letter of marque. Well, they stole it as English privateers with a letter of marque. They stole a French ship off of Port de Paix, off of the coast of Hispaniola or Haiti, not too far from Tortuga. And he led his men off to the coast of West Africa, down around Cape of Good Hope, up into the Red Sea area, and doubled back to Charleston. Shortly afterwards, there was Thomas Tew, who set out with a letter of marque, at least initially, out of Bermuda. And he went out to the Red Sea to do the same thing. He did so with a Rayner in his crew, Josiah Rayner. Then, when Thomas Tew goes back out for his second voyage, leaving from New York?
Yep.
Yeah, leaves out of New York area. He has Josiah Rayner go again. Thomas Tew gets disemboweled by a cannonball, doesn't have a fun time. They don't end up being able to do everything they wanted to with Henry Every. They double back to New York. Eventually, Josiah Rayner shows back up with, allegedly, Thomas Tew's treasure chest. Josiah Rayner, along with his chest, are both captured and impounded, coincidentally, by another man named Josiah Hobart. I have to look at the pronunciation for that, but he was the sheriff. And then eventually he has some wealthy friends bail him out. He then returns back to his wife up there in Connecticut. And then he lives until, I want to say it's the 1750s or so, something like that. He lives a nice long life. He pumps out like 14 children. Like he never pulled out. Like, he just pumped out kids. That's all he did. He came back from being a pirate, and he left behind this huge lineage. And in the aftermath of all of this, his descendants have done extensive genealogical research, tracking down, everything from his descendants, going back to this pirate that went to the Red Sea. But he is absolutely a different pirate whose last name is also Rayner, which is typically spelled with O-R, while our George Rayner of South Carolina went to the Red Sea before him and was traditionally spelled differently with an E-R, despite the fact that he is known to be spelled O-R. So that was a huge thing to separate the whole, I guess, fact from fiction, sorting out a lot of miscommunication throughout history. So Thomas Tew was associated with Josiah Rayner. George Rayner never had anything to do with Thomas Tew. This also means that this George Rayner was the main one who went off and pioneered the pirate round. Thomas Tew didn't pioneer that. George Rayner would have beforehand. So there was that little tidbit, and there's some reasons as to why these are two separate people, namely Josiah Rayner up there, and this is all covered in the book, of course. Josiah Rayner up there, he was already married to, it was Sarah, it's like Sarah Hipcott or something like that. Sarah last name. He was married to Sarah last name somewhere up there in Connecticut, and he returned to her afterwards, and again pumped all his children. While George Rayner of South Carolina, he returns over here. He marries the unfortunately named Dorcas Davis. God, I hate the name Dorcas. And who becomes Dorcas Rayner.
She's probably a lovely woman. We should not judge.
I'm sure she was. And he ends up having a daughter, Mary Rayner. She goes on to marry the son of James Moore, who would go on to be the governor of South Carolina. She becomes Mary Moore. They have their own lineage. two separate family trees that never intertwine in any way, shape, or form. A lot of people that believe that they're descendants of George Rayner or Josiah Rayner, again, they believe it's the same person. They always hit a hiccup. They can never, the people down south can never figure out how their genealogical research connects to the northern Rayner. And the people up north have long been aware for at least 100 years that they draw their lineage to a different Rayner that is not the George Rayner who went to South Carolina. But no history authors have ever separated the two and like taken that into account. So Josiah and George, two separate Rayners. Confusingly, they both went to the Red Sea and were successful and came back from it within the 1690s. This is further made confusing with the fact that there's two separate Bachelor's Delights. There's two different Bachelor's Delights and there's two different Rayners that both go out and do pirate stuff within like a 10-year span.
And they probably knew some of the same people too. That's the worst part.
Yeah, exactly. James Kelly is a carryover from one Bachelor's Delight to the other. And some of the men that went off and did stuff with Thomas too, like Richard Want. Did Richard Want do anything with two, or was it only Every?
No, I remember correctly, he was with two.
Okay. In which
because
case,
that's been the weird thing, because somehow a message he was in the Carolinas too, and then he decided to go up to Pennsylvania and get his letter of marque, and that's how, technically speaking, I guess the Crew of the Fancy, we should call ourselves the Crew of the Dolphin, even though the Crew of the Dolphin ended up joining the Crew of the Fancy on the Fancy.
Yeah, because Richard Want, he was a member of George Rayner's crew. He went out to the Red Sea, and like Richard Want is crazy. Like Richard Want, he went out to the Red Sea with George Rayner, successfully came back a wealthy ass man, and it wasn't good enough. He went back out with Thomas too, and then he came back from round 2 alive and with treasure, and like I guess it wasn't good enough for him, so he goes back out with Henry Every. And then he comes back successful with even more money, and finally he retires. This man had a gambling problem. Like Richard Want was just incessant. He couldn't stop. He couldn't stop pulling the lever and getting money.
He's one of those pirates that needs his own book. It's
like I'm not sure how much there is to write about him, like beyond maybe I could easily see like a devoted chapter or a couple to him. I'm not sure about a book, but I mean, it's potentially enough out there to make a thin book, maybe.
And one of the biggest issues is his last name.
Want?
Because when you're trying to search archives, no, it's like it's a word. It's not a name.
Right. It is hard to control, find, search the word want and get the stuff that you want to find.
That's been a problem every time. Like I have to go places that I know I can get the information on him, but there's so many pirates that I'll be looking for something else and they'll just randomly pop out of the woodwork like, hi, here I am. Oh, wow, I didn't know to even look here for this, but okay, cool. Yeah. I was looking for this.
Also, make sure to look up his name as WONT as well. I know it sounds like won't. But
I want to, for some reason, now there are some documents here in Pennsylvania, but the Quakers and the Anabaptists were awful at keeping old records.
Gotcha.
And it's so for that era, it is so frustrating because there's a lot of documents that just they're not here. I usually have to go to English sources to find them, like .uk sites to find them.
Right.
And I know, I guess the Lancaster County Courthouse, where if I'm looking for stuff for my own county, which is actually Dauphin now, there's nothing really left because I guess they had a flood at some point, never bothered to actually preserve the documents.
That sucks.
Yeah, welcome to Pennsylvania.
So the other thing you had mentioned, asking me about specific, interesting things I came across throughout the research. One of the other things I came across, which I consider it to be a win on my part, No one was necessarily asking for this, but I found George Rayner's birth records. He was a man that, according to not trial transcripts, but from documents from within Charleston upon his arrival and his crew, they had noted him as being of 34 years of age, or it's either 34 or 33. And I was able to track down the origin of him, which is always a hard thing to do with pirates. Like it's pretty easy to figure out when they first came into history, when they started doing stuff. But when you start trying to go back beyond that, I think that was even a discussion that popped up as of recent on Facebook in some of the history groups.
Oh yeah.
It's like, was it Ann Bonny? I think you commented on it or something. You were like, yeah, you can't find out about their history beforehand. Like, it's not there.
I think I threw Rackham under the bus because I'm like, wow,
yeah.
most of what we know is just made up bullshit.
Right. So we already knew, honestly, that, Rayner was around 33, 34, but we don't know where he came from before then. I was able to track it down to Bishopsgate, London, specifically, born in either 1659 or 1660, depending on the calendar that you choose to use. So he was born right there in London, right along the River Thames, which
Thames. Don't
yes,
make
Thames. You were correct.
Thames. Don't make the British angry.
Yep, it is Thames.
I have had to learn how to pronounce Worcester and everything else. I always got to make sure.
So yeah, it's not too much of a stretch to see how he might have gotten from that location out to a life as a sailor, growing up right along the river there. Because of the date of his age of birth, it means that he was also there in London to experience what is it? The Great Plague or whatever. Not it's the subsequent one after the Black Death. It's the Great Plague, and then immediately afterwards, it's like the Great London Fire in 1666 or something.
I just was looking this up the other week for something, and I completely.
So, like, when he was a kid in London, it's like, oh yeah, the plague's in town, rats everywhere, everyone's dying, and then it gets concluded, it's like, yeah, London's on fire, everything here sucks. And then he's right there along the River Thames, and he's able to go out to
Thames.
He's able to go out to sea and start his career and eventually get wrapped up in stuff. There's a lot of people that he could have ended up meeting throughout the Caribbean throughout the 1680s, prior to ending up with James Kelly. A lot of that is admittedly lost. As you know, not everything is recorded, and a lot of things that are recorded aren't recorded well. But I was able to track down where he came from. Technically, he's George Rayner Jr. His father was also George Rayner. His mother was, I want to say, Sarah Rayner. I'd have to double check on that one. But she ends up dying around 1701. His father dies and has a tombstone over there around like 1688. So yeah, that was a neat find for me. Being able to track down the origins of a pirate is an ordeal.
Oh yeah.
But then also, so initially I was really excited because I thought that I'd also found the information regarding his death. I got the next best thing. I got his will. I was so sure that I had found his death and that it had occurred during 1701. 9 years after he and his crew arrived here to Charleston. But instead, I found his will and who he left everyone to. And I have a pretty good idea, which is mentioned in the book, by the date that he dies. Because one of the things that he does, I haven't even really talked about George Rayner and what he does when he gets here to Charleston yet. But when George Rayner shows up, he's got a shit ton of money. He ends up buying Kiowa Island. That name doesn't mean much to you, but down here in South Carolina, it does. It is a big, significant island. Nowadays, it is full of golf resorts and incredibly expensive gated communities, and celebrities own houses on this island. That is what it's known for. It's golf resorts. It's incredibly
real pirates.
that whole entire island belonged to George Rayner. He bought it in 1699, and then in 1700, I want to say, he sold half of it to Captain William Davis, who I believe was just a dude in the area, no particular pirate association. But he leaves his half to his daughter. His daughter passes away around, sorry, his daughter inherits it around 1718 or so. So that leads me to believe that, he's not around anymore. Because when she dies, that's what it is. When she dies in 1718, she leaves it to her son. So she had already inherited it, and it was hers to pass on. So he dies before 1718. So I was able to narrow down that he was born in 1659, Bishopsgate, London, roughly 1660, calendar shit. And he dies sometime prior to 1718. So I was able to nail down those two dates at least and get an idea of where he's from, and the fact that he is a separate man from Josiah Rayner. It felt like some victories. It felt like some historical victories on my part that merited writing the book. I was able to not only compile information that was generally known by people, but also insert new information and separate fact from fiction and make it, a worthwhile thing reading. What else you got?
Oh man. You know what? I'm out. Let's actually see if we got some people to actually ask questions, because we've been going
Absolutely. Yeah,
we've
I
been
have
going
been
on
unable
for
to see the chat this whole time. I'm sitting here on StreamYard.
You should, if there should be a sidebar that says comments.
Oh shit, there is. Look at that.
Oh my gosh, does nobody have questions? I mean, I feel like we've literally covered everything on the planet at this point.
Probably. But yeah, so currently, how long have I been into pirates? All right. I assume that's for me. Maybe
Yep,
it's for you?
No,
Okay.
that's for you.
All right. All right. In that case, so I was born in 1990. I'm 34 years old currently. I was 4 years
Oh,
old.
same age.
Yeah.
I'm the same age as my guy too.
Yeah. I was 4 years old when Lego decided to come out with a Pirates line. So I spent my early years playing with pirate themed Legos, which a couple years later I would continue to still be doing the same while having Muppets Treasure Island on and repeat in the background. A year later, they came out with Cutthroat Island. There wasn't anything else to compare it to at the time. At the time, I thought it was a great movie, amazing movie. I still enjoy it for nostalgic reasons. Hell yeah. And then basically various things throughout, pirate pop culture kept me interested in the topic throughout my teenage years. Pirates of the Caribbean. Then you get, Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Black Sails and Sea of Thieves coming out. Like, there was always something that kept me interested. So I would say for as long as I can remember, because I remember being 3 or 4 and putting together that pirate captain Lego minifigure in the backseat of my mom's car. The one with the peg leg and the bike horn. Let's see.
I'm okay with you answering this one again, because I actually enjoy. I enjoy. I hate to say it. I actually enjoyed Josiah's story a little bit more.
He's more relevant to you.
He's more wild.
So basically, yes, Redbeard. That's his name. So basically, we got George Rayner. We got Josiah Rayner. Josiah Rayner was born. They're different ages, for one. George Rayner was born in 1659, 1660, and about 10 years later was when Josiah Rayner was born. So the different ages. George Rayner was born in Bishopsgate, London, to George Rayner Sr. and Sarah Rayner, whereas Josiah Rayner was born in New York. So they were born on different continents, 10 years apart. We also got different people that they interacted with. George Rayner went out to the Red Sea, came back and did his stuff, and never interacted with Thomas II. But Thomas II goes out with Josiah Rayner And that's why Josiah Rayner goes back up to New York afterwards and, not to Charleston. Because that's where he originates from. That's where Josiah Rayner has a wife, who he returns to. He was married before his departure out into piracy. So they are two separate individuals. Again, Josiah Rayner's descendants, they have done a lot of genealogical research, and they've long determined that these two different Rayners are not the same people. People that are up north, that are Rayner descendants, can never track their lineage back to George Rayner. And the people down here that claim to be descendants of George Rayner can never track their lineage back up to figure out how they fit into the quote-unquote greater Rayner family up north. And the reason is they're two different people. So that would be the answer there.
George married Dorcas.
Oh, Dorcas. Dorcas Davis. Who weirdly doesn't have a tie to Captain Davis, who he gave half of his island to, or sold half of it to. From what I can tell, no relation. But Davis is a very common last name.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, Dorcas is also a fairly common first name, or so I'm led to believe. I still hate it.
Oh, there you go.
Nice. Yeah, Josiah Rayner has not to make you sound less special, but Josiah Rayner has a ton of descendants. And that's because when Josiah Rayner, when he left to go off and do piracy, I want to say during that point in time, he already had somewhere between 1 to 3 children before he departs with Thomas II. When he returns after Thomas II is killed on the second expedition out to the Red Sea, I want to say he has 9 more children. I think by the time that he passes away, he has 12 direct sons and daughters who then go on to, have their own offspring. So the Josiah Rayner family has a very expansive genealogical history and a lot of tangents that go off in different directions. I know that there's specifically a book. I'll get to that. So I know that there is a specific book called what is it? The Rayners and Where We Came From. I believe it was published in 2002. It's either 2002 or 2012. It was written by one of the members of the Josiah Rayner family. I believe it was a limited print that existed. I know it was available on Amazon. It's still available on Amazon, but because it's out of print, it is very pricey. There is that book. And then also, throughout some of the research for this book, and also some of my previous books that also involved George Rayner, I did speak with Robert Rayner. He is also a Josiah Rayner descendant. He lives here locally in the South Carolina area. He actually does boating stuff up and down along the coast. And he has also published a book on South Carolina. He published a book on Bull's Island. On Bull's Island, that is where George Rayner allegedly hid some pirate treasure. So there's a lot of confusion.
Here, hang on. Is this the book? Hang on, let me get my phone. There it is.
Yes, that is it. The Rayners of Massachusetts and Where We Came From. That is
you
the
can
book.
actually, apparently you can actually get it as an ebook.
Oh, nice.
So there we go.
But yeah, I spoke with Robert Rayner. Robert Rayner. He wrote a book down here called Exploring Bull's Island. And Bull's Island, again, is an island that George Rayner allegedly buried treasure at. So I reached out to him back in 2021, 4 or 5 years ago. And he was the one who initially sent me off on, admittedly, this tangent that ends up being this book, because he was the first person that was like, hey, I know you reached out to me regarding the buried treasure of George Rayner, and I know that you believe that I'm a descendant of George Rayner from what you've read. He says, but I'm a descendant of Josiah Rayner. Those are absolutely two different people. He was the one who got me started on this path about 4 or 5 years ago. Let's see. Am I a member of the Descendants of Pirates and Privateers? So I wish for that to be true, but I will say that throughout the course of writing this book on Arabian Gold, George Rayner and such, I did end up signing up to Ancestry. on Ancestry, I ended up doing some research. That is actually how I came across some of this information regarding George Rayner. And while I was there, I did try to look into my own backstory, so to speak, a little bit. I was able to see, how many people in my family had the last name Marrow, for example. And going far enough back, the only thing I can find is that a lot of my lineage on my father's side does trace back to the Mayflower. Um, and somewhere in between there is one man who I believe has to do with, I want to say, Revolutionary War, who was a captain. He was Captain Washburn, if that name rings a bell to anybody. From my understanding, he's like somewhat notable. I think there's a plaque that exists for him. But I have absolutely done no research into his name. I don't know anything about him yet. But somewhere along my lineage, there was at least another captain. But his name was Captain Washburn. That was before the word Marrow gets introduced, unfortunately. So I'm still the first Captain Marrow. Do I also hate pirate AI?
Oh gosh.
Is this specifically in regarding to images, or are we talking about trying to interact with AI regarding questions? I'm going to assume it's images.
Frogman's trying to bait. Come on, Frogman. Don't be doing that.
So when it comes to me and AI, we have a little bit of a differing opinion. The way that I feel about it is that I feel like AI in general is something of a Pandora's box. It has been opened. It will not go away, regardless of how much people hate it or don't hate it. It is, regardless, a part of our life going forward in the future for the remainder of our lives. And I feel like it has its merit in certain, in certain respects. First off, I will absolutely never trust AI as a replacement for historical research. You can ask, like, not that not that I have attempted to, but to test the waters, I have tried to press it. I've tried ChatGPT and also Meta AI and a few others.
Oh yeah, I've done that. I've even done that for a video before. I
Yeah, like
confess that
trying to
one.
grill them to see like how much they actually know, and like all of them make up stuff.
The
All
keel
of
hawk.
them, yeah, all of them fabricate information. All of them try to fabricate to impress you and to give a quick response that they hope that you will believe. And then whenever you try to correct them on it, they'll do a follow-up quick search and like, oh yeah, you're right. So
Oh
like
no,
that is
I think it was ChatGPT I got into a fight with, and it's like we're done with this conversation. I'm like, no,
yeah,
no, you told me about keel hauling. Are you the one giving all these people this false information?
it'll
I'm done with
also
this conversation.
it will also fabricate stuff just to appease you. If you try to intentionally tell them, no, George Rayner was not from 1692, he was from 1792, it will agree with you. It'll say, oh yeah, you're right, I was wrong. Like, you can't trust it for that. It's a good conversationalist sometimes, and sometimes you can get it to give you sources, which you can then follow down for a rabbit hole. It has its merits for historical research, but do not ask it questions and believe its answers. Ask it for sources, um, which you can then follow on and use your own human judgment regarding. When it comes to imagery, uh, it's getting better. I, I will say that for the most part, it has a really hard time doing ships appropriately. It has a real hard time with sails, which side of the mast to put them on, the rigging. It's a lot of intricity that it doesn't know how to handle.
Buckles,
What it can do,
buttons.
yeah. Oh, yeah, buttons on clothing as well. What it can do is it can provide a good, aesthetically overall appeasing image based on what we expect pirates to look like. It's a good jumping off point. It's a good thing that you could generate something, hand it off to a traditional artist, and say, here's some groundwork. I want something that looks like this, but done correctly. Now, either fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of this you are on, that will cease to be the case in time. His AI has already gotten better over the last couple of years, another couple, and it will get stuff correct. And you will be able to determine like specifically what you want, and it will do it correctly. It's just a matter of time. That being said, it's also really good for inspiration. You can ask it to give summarizations of things, and from which you can opt to paraphrase from. You can ask it to help you with grammar. You can ask it to give you ideas for how to, say, structure something. That being said, one of the things there is that. If I will say that if you're a person who wants a historically accurate image, you will never get one out of AI yet. Further down the line, probably. As of right now, no.
I just realized I don't think I've ever actually told the channel why I hate AI with a passion.
Okay. Well, now's your time.
So
You're in the spotlight.
let me start by saying, if blank happened, I'd feel better. If AI had actually been released as something that you yourself could train, you could train it in an isolated space and then release it to, I think about some of the hats and things that I research. Archives will not always list things in a way that you'll be able to find something like those playing cards that Pitor found a while back. That's something I could never have found because I was not knowing, hey, why don't you check playing cards to find these fashion images? And they're not playing cards for fashion. No, they're playing cards for scientific instruments, like something you'll never look for.
Right.
And sure enough, boom, I find the holy grail of some of the stuff I've been trying to find. We now know that English sailors actually had sashes. Things like that. If an AI could be trained to do that, I would have no problem with it. It would make the lives of so many historians so much easier.
So I don't know the specifics about how to do it. I have a friend of mine who does a lot more with AI than I do. I mean, admittedly, the main stuff I do with AI, I really enjoy the whole musical aspect of it. There's a lot of fun to be had with that. But he has a lot to do with manufacturing, not manufacturing, but training AI and trying to set up AI programs for on and off throughout the course of the last year. I've been trying to work with him to set up some sort of AI that he can train to specifically be a useful research tool, where specifically every single time that it gives you any results, it will always note sources and will specifically only draw results from verified sources, like Benderson Little's blog, Pirate Surgeon website. Do not pull stuff from Wikipedia. Do not pull it from random
Reddit.
social media sites. Yeah, don't pull it from me. I don't necessarily cite my sources on my random history posts. I do in my books. But if I can narrow that down, that actually sounds like a useful thing.
The thing that really frustrates me, so you and I using AI, if I ever used AI, my computer would probably burst into flames and Frogman would point at me and go, ha ha ha. But if the biggest issue that I see with it is there's so many people that are experiencing the Dunning-Kruger effect, and they feel like AI is a replacement for actual research. Even Mark Cuban the other day on Blue Sky, I got into a fight with Mark Cuban over this. He's talking about, well, if you don't really know something, you don't really need a college degree for it. You can just use ChatGPT. And I'm like, what? No. Maybe a math problem. Yeah, sure. That might work that way. I don't
actually I do not trust it for that. I have asked extensive math problems sometimes because in addition to all the pirate history stuff, I'm also a nerd. I'm also designing my own miniatures game. And I've been working on that on and off for about a year now. And when I ask it stuff about statistics and probability regarding dice rolls and modifiers to dice rolls and, you know, nerd
Yeah.
game mechanics, it's wrong.
You see,
And
and
I have to point
that's
out
what I
that it's
thought.
wrong.
That's something that I think it was Adam
Again, it won't
Conover.
be wrong forever.
He did a thing the other day. He did a thing the other day, and he's like, AI is just like a bad search engine.
Yeah. It not ministers, but miniatures, as in like 28 millimeter dudes that you move around on the table. You got 3-dimensional terrain, Warhammer, Malifaux, Infinity, War Machine, etc. Also over here, I see what's my favorite pirate captain.
And are you partial
What
to
is my
South
favorite
Carolina
pirate?
Pirates?
I'm not necessarily partial to them. Again, whenever it comes to it, I do enjoy 17th century. I do thoroughly enjoy George Rayner, hence the reason why I wrote a book on him and made a reenactment crew based on him and presenting his story. So he's definitely up there. I would say another 17th century pirate that I'm partial to is John Coxon. John Coxon has a very impressive story. Not sure if you know much about him necessarily. So John Coxon, from memory, some of the big things that he did was he took over a Spanish man of war. He captured it, made it his flagship. He was specifically a guy who got captured. It's either 3 or 4 times, and every single time that he gets captured, he either gets let loose by winning his trial, escaping prison, or being busted out. Over and over and over, John Coxon is captured, goes back to piracy, get captured again, gets back out, goes back to piracy, gets captured again, etc. And eventually, no one knows what happened to him. Like, he doesn't get captured. It's like the Henry everything. He doesn't get executed, whatever. He got away with everything he did. He just kept doing pirate stuff and he kept getting away with it and kept getting out of captivity just over and over and over. This was I want to say 1670s. He did a whole bunch of stuff around the Caribbean.
Oh yeah,
Like,
that
very impressive
my
individual.
my cutoff for caring's like about 1680.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like 1670s. It might be. It might. It might very well be very early 1680s, like 1681, 1682, something like that. But he did a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of impressive stuff throughout the Caribbean. He's the main person that you end up coming across if you're trying to look down the rabbit hole for, a Jack Sparrow type person. This is the day you almost caught so and so. If you try to find the historical version of that, it's John Coxon. Like, there's no known depiction of him, unfortunately. He has like a pretty well recorded history, but yeah, he's the guy who just kept doing it and kept getting away with it, and in the end, did get away with it. Again, 17th century pirates are impressive. So
Ooh.
there's that. And that being said, South Carolina Pirates, I'm not necessarily partial to them. I enjoy Steed Bonnet just because a lot of what I have to do along the coast here regarding just over the line up into North Carolina, the Cape Fear area, down to Charleston, it's like, yeah, both of those are big Steed Bonnet places. Both of those are big Blackbeard places. So, I mean, I do like some of the South Carolina pirate stuff for sure. My favorite place of pirate history that I've been to. Let's see. That one is. It's hard to pick. I will say that as a person traveling up and down along the coast, my favorite place I've ever been to along the southeast coast is St. Augustine. St. Augustine is an amazing city. For anyone for anyone interested in pirate history, absolutely recommend it. You're not going to find any other situation like that where you're walking down through the streets in what looks like an old Spanish city. It's one of those nice walkable cities. You can park at the parking garage, and then you never have to go back to your vehicle. You never have to move it again. You just walk everywhere. It's one of those walking cities. They have the pirate treasure museum there. A lot of great artifacts, as well as screen used props. Cool place. It also has the Castillo de San Marcos, the Spanish fort. And the Spanish fort is a prominent piece of pirate history as well. It was constructed in St. Augustine because that they had been pillaged by pirates over and over. Francis Drake had done it before. Robert Cyril did it in the 1600s. And then afterwards, they're like, yeah, we need to build a fort in case pirates do this again. And specifically, that fort was also helped being built by a pirate. That was Andrew Ranson. Andrew Ranson had been a member of Captain Thomas Jingle's crew, who got captured by Spaniards north of St. Augustine. He was put into forced servitude, and he helped build the fort. So there was a pirate who helped build the Castillo de San Marcos. And then in 1702, when Charleston launches an assault against St. Augustine, specifically because because the Spaniards were like, "Hey, Charleston, we know that you've been friendly with pirates. We know what you just did with George Rayner and them. You are a pirate haven. We want to destroy you." In retaliation, in 1702, Charleston was like, "Oh no, they want to hurt us for helping pirates." So they launch a siege against the Castillo de San Marcos. So the Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine, it was built because of pirate attacks. It was built by a pirate. It was sieged by people who were protecting themselves against allegations of helping piracy. And during the 1702 siege on the Castillo de San Marcos, it was defended by Andrew Ranson, a pirate. Like that fort is like weirdly intertwined with a whole bunch of pirate stuff. So I would say that's a big place.
My favorite place actually would have to be the Delaware Bay, just the Delaware Bay in general, because
there's a lot of shit that
so
went down there.
yeah, and a lot of people don't realize it. Like there's when you go to Cape May, there's what used to be a fresh water source. Now it's brackish water because the locals got sick and tired of people stealing their cattle. Some of them were sailors, some of them were pirates.
Right.
Pretty much all the greats from the whole time period stopped there at least once, or
Right.
were in the vicinity at least once. And it's like maybe not Henry Every, but a good chunk of his crew passed through there.
Right.
Blackbeard. I mean, they've all been there.
That's as far north as we know that Blackbeard went and Stede Bonnet went. We know that Olivier Levasseur went up there.
We had Canute across the bay over in depending on where you're from, it's either pronounced Lewis, Delaware, or Lewes, Delaware.
Okay.
And that was supposedly attacked by Canute. Have we even figured out yet who he is yet?
Also over here in the chat, the Pirate Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. So I went to Salem, Massachusetts back in 2018. It was a great experience. I went up there during October to see Salem during October. Hit up all of Rhode Island, all the H.P. Lovecraft's places. I went to some horror conventions there in Salem. I got to meet Elvira. Like, it was a whole bunch of cool stuff. But unfortunately, while I was there, I want to say that the Pirate Museum in Salem either wasn't open yet or it was closed while I was there. And the place that I was staying at the time, I was unaware of how close I was to the Widow Museum. So unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to go to either of them. But I do know that currently the Pirate Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, they stock my second book, Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasures of the Northeast Coast. I have a contact up there in the New England area who was able to get my book into that museum. So copies are up there. Bristol, unfortunately, no. The only place I've ever been outside the United States is I've been to Canada. Originally, I'm from Michigan, and I went to Detroit area one time when I was about 14 years old for a Magic the Gathering tournament. And me and my friends, we stayed in a campground just over the state line. So I've technically been to Canada to see a campground.
Sorry, I've never heard of the Pirate Museum in Salem, and now I'm like looking at it.
Yeah, they're like on good terms with like the Witta Shipwreck Museum. From my understanding, some of the people that orchestrate events at one have like some sort of bleed over to the other. But yeah, it's Real Pirates Salem.
Oh wow, that's
From my
apologies. So
understanding,
interesting.
from my understanding, back in the day, they had a very small museum in Salem that wasn't well reviewed. That like from what I know from people up there is that it was filled with musty old mannequins and wasn't very exciting or well done. But I want to say that within the last 4 or 5 years, they completely revamped the entire site and updated like everything. But yeah, it, sometimes. Nice. Yeah, there's lots
Actually,
of. Go ahead.
there's amazing how many shipwrecks are along the East Coast and how much you can actually find that could be associated with things that, like, a lot of your, you gotta think of like how many literal tons of cargo was lost,
Right.
especially porcelain and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's see. The DeWolf family of Bristol. I can't say I'm familiar with it. Does it ring a bell to you?
It actually does.
DeWolf? I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to think mentally of any other ways that might have been spelled, and it come across my radar. D'apostrophe.
Balthazar de Wolf. Is it Balthazar?
It's a badass name.
Yep, and right there. My gosh. Wow, they were involved in the slave trade. Oi.
Who wasn't?
Actually, a piece I haven't done a I do not like the opposite thing, but yeah, right there is a
Oh yeah, I
Manila
remember you posting
with
about those.
about 10 to 50 of these were traded for people.
Mhm.
Figured I'd pick one up. I had a chance to get one for a good price, so yeah. Given some of the topics this channel comes up with.
Right. I mean, yeah, that comes up a lot for me down here too. You know, in the Charleston area. Like downtown Charleston, not too far away from the old Exchange and Provost dungeon, we have what is it? We have the old slave mart that you can go visit. And then we also have another area where slaves were allegedly sold along like a marketplace area. So that is, I don't know. That's a big primary piece of like our history down here. So I don't want to say I'm desensitized to it, but I'm like, yep, that's a slave thing. But yeah, like when it comes to Charleston, like as far as they're concerned, history begins in 1776 and nothing ever
Yep.
happened before that. We are a town that is known for the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. We also might have done some slave stuff before that, but that's basically our history. And we never interacted with any pirates ever.
Exactly. Pennsylvania, we start with the 7 Years' War.
Gotcha.
And we just, nothing else happened before that. That's why I recognize that. The Gatsby affair. Okay.
Neat.
Ooh, okay. Well, I've done some research into the Irish indentured servants. Actually, if you want to get into the Scottish ones, it's Scottish History Tours. They have a YouTube channel.
Mhm.
He did a really great video series on essentially Scottish. I hate to call it this because it's not what it is, but it kind of was. There was a couple rich guys in Scotland that were basically kidnapping people.
Gotcha.
and or holding them for like made up crimes and shipping them to America and giving them really bad contracts and stuff as indentured servants. It was a really messed up thing. A lot of them got sent to Pennsylvania, which is just insane because it's like, wow, wait, what did we do? Oh, we were just taking random Scottish children. Oh, that's lovely.
Yep. But yeah. Anything else to wrap up here?
Ah. Any more questions? Speak now, forever hold your peace, because my gosh, it's been about 2 hours now. Well,
I guess as a placeholder, I was just going to say that currently I have my next book coming up, which is Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasures of Atlantic Canada, which covers, again, folklore tales and the history behind them, separating fact from fiction from New Brunswick all the way up to the hell is that up there? Newfoundland and Labrador. Canon talk.
oh, we were trying to find some missing canon during the course of the research. Rich is our master gunner.
Yeah, however, it turns out that wasn't necessarily too important. So regarding George Rayner, here we go. Let's talk about canons a little bit. So we got George Rayner. He shows up in 1692 here in the Charleston Harbor, and he arrives aboard a ship called the Loyal Jamaica. Originally, the ship had been a French, probably frigate, named La Constance, which they renamed to Loyal Jamaica. Then they renamed it to Bachelor's Delight. They went out and did piracy. They came back, and before they show up to the South Carolina coast, they rename it back to Loyal Jamaica. And if you pay attention to a lot of pirate history books, the general tale that you'll come across is that upon his arrival to the Charleston area, he runs his ship aground, or it is left as a wreck in Seawee Bay. And then afterwards, pretty much all the contents of the ship get sold to the colony, including the cannons. The cannons get sold, or they are confiscated in some way, shape, or form. So for a while, a long-term goal that I had was trying to figure out what happened to the cannons. It's like, where did they go? Did they use them as part of the wall? There was a fortification that was built in 1701 around the city of Charlestown. But the thing is, I don't know what happened to the cannons. So I was trying to figure that out. But bottom line is, I guess it's not too important, because it wasn't just left abandoned. It wasn't just ran aground and left to sink in Seawee Bay. No, it was confiscated by Charleston's government. It was resold to a merchant captain. It was renamed the Carolina Merchant and continued its career as a ship beyond the pirates. Now I'll leave that for you.
My wife and son, who reenact with us, they're Ukrainian. Hi.
But yeah, so it turns out the whole canon thing wasn't too important, because probably they were either confiscated and then put into the powder magazine and were maybe used along the walls, or they were just part of the package deal of the ship being resold. So unfortunately, that's all the canon talk that I have regarding this topic.
Frogman, don't do that.
Nice potato cannon.
Yep, right.
Yeah, that's always a possibility too. I mean, we also had discussed the possibility of, like, it being used as a piece of, I don't want to say public furniture, like a, what's the word here? Like a fence post. Like, cannons are used as such things.
No, do not summon them here. Frogman, what's wrong with you?
The ATF.
And it's usually with black powder cannon. The biggest thing you really got to watch with is the amount of spicy coffee.
I like that. I might use spicy coffee in a presentation at some point.
If you're doing anything on any platform that like gets paranoid, spicy baseballs.
Mhm.
That's for the thing that you.
Right. I gotcha. Yeah, but yeah. All right. Any closing questions? Anything to wrap up here? Anything from you?
No. I think we should all get ourselves to bed now.
All right.
Oh wait.
Yep.
Oh wow, there you go.
Yep. So yeah, I guess just to close up here, I've got my book, Arabian Gold. I got the title here. Arabian Gold, Charleston's Red Sea Pirates of 1692. And its release date is going to be on March 20th. It'll be on Amazon.
Focusing. Boom, it's focused. There we
it
go.
is.
All right, take care, everybody. Then.
I'll let you hear on the 20th. And if you want to reach out to me on Facebook, that's my primary platform. I'm more than happy to ship out pre-orders. Right now, I'm doing pre-orders. I'm happy to ship out signed copies. And the signed copies also come with an aged map on period-appropriate paper of the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea.
And his print quality's good.
You love showing off that thing. I appreciate it.
I do. I love it.
Will do.
But, take care, everyone.
I guess we're signing off here.
Yep. Catch you all later.
Yep. Later, man.